7th, 2023, Palestinian terror group Hamas entered Israel, brutally murdering around 1,200 people and abducting 251 hostages, many from their homes and a music festival. What happened next was shocking. If there was any global outrage in response to the terrorist attack, it was quickly memory holed as Israel declared war the following day and launched a large-scale ground invasion of Gaza 20 days later. Notably, immediately after the attack on October 7th, protesters took to the streets around the world with signs that read, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and resistance by any means necessary." Just over 2 years later, here in Canada, police reported anti-Semitic hate crimes have skyrocketed. Jewish institutions have been shot at and firebombed. Many university associations have brought their student members out on October 7th, not to memorialize those killed on that date, but to support Palestine, and many would argue, by extension, Hamas's actions. And in Montreal, one of our major cities has been dubbed the anti-Semitism capital of North America. What's happening here? I'm Terry Newman for NP Comment, and I have with me today a guest who's created a podcast series asking that question, Canadaland founder and editor Jesse Brown. Thank you for joining us today, Jesse.
Thanks for having me, Terry.
Great. So let's start with you telling us a bit about why and when you initially decided to make the podcast. Was there an event or news story that made you think somebody needs to ask what's happening here?
Well, I went through a series of events. It was actually covered by the National Post, where I had been doing my job as a journalist and as a media critic and reporter much the same way I'd always done it. I've always looked at discrimination in Canada. We did a series on anti-Indigenous discrimination. We did a series called the Kopernik Affair about a professor who was accused of bombing a synagogue, who probably didn't do it. We go deep on all of these issues, no matter what the community affected is. Very shortly after October 7th, I started to note that these demonstrations, ostensibly against Israel, were targeting Jewish institutions. They were targeting a Jewish community center in downtown Toronto. They were going after Jewish business owners. The rhetoric was different than it had been before. And I started to point this out, not really expecting this to be very controversial. Of course, we shouldn't be protesting a community center, which is also a place where people pray, and it's a daycare center. Of course, we shouldn't be. Nobody should be protesting that. It's not the appropriate place. And it really contradicts what the protest movement has always said, which is that we are not against Jews, we're against Israel. The response to me pointing these things out was unlike anything I had experienced before. There was a swift and kind of widely participated in backlash, where I was immediately cast by many as a genocide supporter. I don't cover the Middle East, and I don't take a position on Middle East politics. So I started to be accused of having all sorts of agendas and things like that, which felt very much like Jewish conspiracy theory. And it grew and grew. My company, Canadaland, lost about 15% of our paying subscribers. There was sort of an ad hoc organic campaign to blacklist and boycott the company. There was support for these efforts within the company. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. And it put to me a very difficult situation of, do I relent? And I was getting a lot of advice. This is not a winning issue. Nobody wants to hear what you have to say about anti-Semitism. This is bad for the company. Or do I persist? And what was happening to Jews in Canada just got worse and worse and worse. And I felt like there was no choice but to persist and to keep documenting this. And if anything changed, it's that I decided that merely pointing these things out as they occur on Twitter or on a commentary show is not enough. We needed to have a thorough journalistic account of what's happening here. And one of the main questions I try to answer is, well, this is happening all over the world. Is it worse in Canada? Terry, it is much worse in Canada.
I am with you, Jesse. I don't know if you know that I cover the protests here in Montreal as well.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, and some of the stuff in Concordia. And I've been a student and a teacher at both Concordia and McGill, so it is definitely worse. Your series itself, which I had a great binge of, currently has 5 episodes. The latest was released today, and I got a chance to listen to a little bit of that too, so we can discuss that at the end. But I want to discuss each episode a little bit shortly and just talk about some of the questions, the research questions that you frame the series around, that you want to answer, which I guess from your post today you feel like you've answered. You started off asking, did a country that prides itself on multiculturalism suddenly become a global capital of bigotry? Or, are news and stats getting it all wrong? And you asked, are Jews being targeted for being Jewish, or is it for what they support? So the whole, is it anti-Semitism really, or just anti-Zionism? And, who is doing this targeting actually? And is the pro-Palestinian movement responsible in any way? Or is it Israel's fault? And then again, why here, which I think your series is moving towards? And what is it about Canada that makes the situation seem so extra? So we'll discuss at the end, like whether or not you feel like you've answered these questions fully. But your first series episode is called Unsafe or Uncomfortable. And it asks the questions, has life changed forever for Jews in Canada? Or at least for now, under what's happening here. So in it, it's a great episode. You talk to several Jews about their experiences in Canada since October 7th. There's a young girl at a drive-through window who experiences discrimination for her Jewish heritage, but is simultaneously applauded for her Chinese heritage. There's a Jewish family who are called disgusting genociders by another family who's simply walking behind them, also with young kids, just because they're visibly Jewish. There's also two young Jewish kids in this episode, a girl and a boy, who are bullied at school for being Jewish, with the boy also being physically assaulted, and the schools just seem completely useless. So based on those interviews, were the subjects, in your opinion, unsafe or uncomfortable?
I think it's just objectively true that a lot of Jews have been unsafe. And what that episode really tries to do is try to break out of this semantic puzzle that people try to engage Jews in when we speak up and say something is happening here that is not okay. We are gaslit. We're told this is not happening because you're Jewish. This is happening because you're a Zionist. Well, what if I don't call myself a Zionist? Well, we'll tell you if you're a Zionist. What you're seeing is a political targeting for people's beliefs and their actions. It's got nothing to do with them being Jewish. There's a lot that you have to get through. Some people deny that it's even happening at all. They'll say that it's a Jewish conspiracy. The Jews are the ones doing this, or we're over-reporting it.
Yeah.
So I really wanted to.
And I want to stop you for a second. The other obvious question is, so what? So what if they support the state of Israel?
Right? Well, we get to that in the second
episode. Not necessarily the actions of the current government, but if you take anti-Zionism and you can't subtract it, like if it just becomes a blanket statement for any government that's in power at the time, and you just want to do it, then aren't you just indicating that you just don't want the state of Israel to exist?
This is a really important point, because even when you get to the level of people who say, yes, I support Israel, that's a very different thing than supporting this current government in Israel. That's a very different thing than supporting the war in Gaza or any number of other things. All of that nuance and distinction has evaporated. And the most tenuous link to Israel, or just not wanting it wiped off the map, is enough to, in the eyes of an increasing number of people in the anti-Zionist movement, you are a Zionist and Zionists are fair game. Before I even get there, I wanted to find out, is this true that it's people who are somehow hazily or directly associated with Zionism, or is this an anti-Jewish movement? Mm-hmm. And, because people will also negate the statistics. You cited them at the beginning, the police reported hate crime statistics, which is the kind of universal metric that every group looks to for documenting whether or not there's a rise, if it's getting worse or better in terms of actual crime against identifiable groups. Not only is it skyrocketed, Jews are a tiny percentage of the Canadian population. We're the number one target of these police-reported hate crimes. People will argue that itself is can't be trusted for various reasons that I think can all be discounted, but they'll dismiss that. I put on my boots and went to speak to people, and I spoke to people who have nothing to do with Israel, nothing to do with Zionism. They're just Jewish people. And
Mm-hmm.
as you ran through, I very intentionally spoke to people who were targeted because they have Jewish names, or because they were spotted in public wearing a yarmulke, or
Mm-hmm.
because their classmates knew that they were Jewish. And a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what happened to them was not simply about other kids bullying or assaulting both of those kids, but the administration doing nothing to protect these kids, because they too bought this idea that this is more of a political disagreement, and it's a political disagreement between an oppressor and oppressed, and it's not right to take the side of the oppressor. Whatever was fueling it became very clear that not only do Jews actually have reason to be unsafe, Jews are unsafe in Canada, but that this is becoming increasingly institutionally accepted, normalized. There's some institutions that actually promote it.
Yeah, and your second episode, The Purge, asks exactly who is getting targeted, and by a movement of rage against Israel. And you made some interesting choices there. You had an interview with Heather Reisman, the CEO of Indigo. You interviewed Selena Robinson, former NDP member. You spoke to a grade school teacher, I think by the name of Lori, and her experiences, with her colleagues. And you touched on a little bit about UBC's situation, about not really having anti-Semitism at all in their DEI criteria until recently. And so, what I think, what did you? It was interesting, especially the talk with Heather. The distinction that kind of she made with you was that, this is a scholarship program. It happens to be for soldiers, and this is the situation. This is how she explained it for the audience. And Selena's conversation talked about how, she initially, it seemed more in her situation to be a bit more anti-Semitism, and then it kind of like it became a bit more about a conflict over the creation of the state of Israel and whether or not it was made by Israelis and stuff like that. But the situation with the school, the DEI offices, this is something I've noticed as well here in Montreal. Or there's they don't. That's not really a distinguishing factor. There's sort of a hierarchy, and the situation with Lori was just a situation where I think you might agree that people who think they are doing good and right things, the good and the right thing, are behaving in such a way without much knowledge of history, or Jewish history in particular, or what some of these groups are doing and the effects it's having, in a way that is causing, I wouldn't say necessarily directly anti-Semitism with the case of the school teacher, but just an unknowing kind of ignorance that creates an inhospitable environment.
Yeah, I think that's all accurate. One thing that becomes clear as we hear these different stories, like a thread that connects them all, is that a lot of the people who are doing a lot of harm are not people who are like inherently hating of Jews, or people who've been masking their enmity towards Jews, secret anti-Semites. Those exist, but what we're seeing instead is a lot of moral confusion, because Jews don't really fit into the categories that we've created to describe people who do find themselves in vulnerable situations. The idea that is rising is, well, Jews are white, which would be, that'd be news to Hitler. That would be news to the Mizrahi and Sephardic Jews, and they're black Jews. But we're getting recoded as white.
Mm-hmm.
Colonizers, I don't know what country Israel is a colony of,
Mm-hmm.
but using the rhetoric of the day, we have Jews being recoded as sort of the worst in the current hierarchy of who's good and who's evil. I think in a more day-to-day basis, like, I don't know, you and I are both journalists, and we have this thing, the Canadian Association of Journalists, and they do diversity stats. I think diversity stats are a good thing to keep track of. I think that we should know, are Black people getting more or less representation as the years go on in newsrooms? And so Canadaland's always participated in this diversity survey, and we provide anonymized data about the makeup of our company. And I just realized this year, they don't ask if anyone's Jewish. So I know of many Jews who have left newsrooms in Canada. And Jewish representation in major newsrooms is way down. And we have no way of counting that because Jews don't count in these diversity stat methodologies. The situation that you point to at UBC was like a career doctor who'd been teaching there for decades. You know, he felt like a colleague was saying things that were anti-Semitic online. Maybe he was right, maybe he was wrong. But there's supposed to be a clear process that you go through when you feel that that's happening, where you can say, I've been subjected to racist discrimination from a colleague, and I would like to make my case. And the answer he got was, there's no case to be made because anti-Semitism does not exist according to our methodologies. So this is something that's been brewing for a long time. And I think that it's true that a lot of Jews have not faced much persecution or discrimination until very recently. So I think a lot of us didn't realize that this situation had been building and growing until we needed these protections or this information, and it wasn't there for us.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is obviously a long history of anti-Semitism at schools, McGill, stuff like that. So the third is a very brave conversation. It's called As a Jew. So a lot of people say, as a Jew. You know, I'm a Jew, so I can then speak. And the implication from that is that you're speaking for all Jews, of course. And it asks, who are the Jews against Israel? And what do they make of the current surge in hatred? And you speak to a very interesting character. His name is David, is it Meslin? Is that correct?
Meslin, yeah.
Okay. So he's what people would call a Jew for Palestine, I guess he would refer. And we see them at these Jews at protests, and they're very small faction, but they're very, very vocal and very active. And these are basically anti-Zionist Jews. And this conversation I thought was really enlightening. He consistently bases his argument, I don't know if you've noticed this, on the premise that Israel is committing mass murder and genocide. And therefore, of course, if you really believe that, if you really believe that Israel is setting out to do that, you can follow that argumentation and see how that can almost justify anything, right? So I know at the beginning of the conversation you said, you know, I don't follow Mideast politics or, you know, things like that. And that's true. Like, I'm not a specialist in that as well. But did you feel differently after listening to this conversation? Did you feel like maybe like the premise or the frame or where you could go from that conversation with him, and actually with Zaman as well in the next episode, was kind of, you know, grounded on that initial premise?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in there. I mean, first of all, he's a Jew for Palestine. I don't know any Jews who say that they're against Palestine. I'm sure there are some, but that has been claimed by a very specific and very small minority of Jews who are, I think, more accurately described as anti-Zionist Jews. And Dave Meslin describes himself that way. Mm-hmm. So there's no one Jewish opinion. Everyone is entitled to take whatever stand they want, and I don't debate him or deny him his take. But there are such things as consensuses within communities, and we have data on where the Canadian Jewish community stands. There's a lot of variation between whether people call themselves a Zionist or simply say that Israel is important to them and they feel connected to Israel, or just that they think Israel should exist. But you add all of those people up and you've got about 94% of Jews who think Israel should exist and feel connections to it, right. Inclusive of Zionists. Most Jews call themselves Zionists. David Meslin is one of the 3% who does not, who's an anti-Zionist, which means he does not think Israel should exist, and it means some other things as well. That's fine. He can think that. What I object to is that these Jews, are wildly overrepresented in a way of balancing out media coverage to say, well, we have a Jew here, and this Jew also has these opinions that Israel doesn't have a right to exist. This is a wide distortion of what the community feels. My conversation with him, now then I sat down with him and I put him on my podcast. Why did I do that? If there's one thing I wanted to accomplish in this show is to, beyond trying to understand the things I was trying to understand, is to try to find out if any of this stuff sustains like an application of reason and inquiry through a civil conversation. And it was a civil conversation. We're not yelling at each other or calling each other names. Mm-hmm. And it was enlightening to me. I did learn something from that conversation. It terrified me a little bit because I know Dave Meslin. I think he's a decent person. I think that he means well, and I think he's an intelligent person. But in my opinion, the things he was saying did not hold up to scrutiny. He was making arguments that the level of violence from bomb threats to Jewish schools is not really serious because there was no bomb.
There
That
was
doesn't
that
make
marshmallow argument, right?
Yeah, that we should that it's all well and good for me to care about anti-Semitism, but he doesn't consider it a priority even in the top 100 priorities on his list because Jews have more because no one's been killed yet. I think there have been 7 attempts at
Yes.
mass murder of Jews since
Mm-hmm.
October 7th, like in the
Yeah.
name of Palestine or Islamism. So just because they haven't succeeded yet, this doesn't matter. It seemed like he was arguing. It was a very strange argument, and what I realized throughout it was that once you've taken this, like you've gone past a certain point and you've declared something as extreme as a sovereign country should cease to exist, it's a very hard position to come back from. It's a very hard thing to say, you know what, I was wrong. That went a bit too far. I wish it wasn't. I think that people would be welcomed. I think that there's a lot of compassion for people who have second thoughts. But I saw what he was doing of like moving the criteria of first what he was doing wasn't hurting anyone and no one is getting hurt. It's a
Mm-hmm.
lie. So, well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe people are getting hurt, but they're not getting hurt bad enough. Or maybe they are getting hurt bad, but it's not as bad as what's happening to Gaz. Like nothing was
Right.
going to change the conclusion.
Right.
And that's frightening because it really does, I think, reveal the grip that dogma and ideology have on some people. And I mean, I don't think that I'm going to be changing the minds of the Dave Meslins of the world, but my hope is that the people who listen to this, and people should listen to it, it's an extraordinary conversation,
It is.
who people who are not quite as far down that road as Dave Meslin might listen to that and have a think, because there are other options. You don't have to go all in on this anti-Zionist agenda just to advocate for Palestinians or to advocate for peace. There are a lot of people are getting dragged along to an all or nothing proposition.
Right. No, I agree. And yeah, you did a great job of pushing back with him about, like just because these things haven't happened, or, somebody has to die and they haven't died yet, or it's not as bad as what's happening there, doesn't negate the importance of what's happening here. And also, and like, why don't you care about what's happening here? Right. So all very good things. And you did send him an additional question that he kind of said he would muse about, and I don't think he really got back to you. What was that question? Do you remember?
Well, that's a good illustration of this because he's a person who is he gets to the point of he's okay with armed resistance but isn't okay with terrorism. Well, Hamas is a registered terrorist entity in Canada, and even
Mm-hmm.
if that doesn't really change your opinion, there is no question that the butchery and the rape of October 7th was terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
So I put the question to him because he was in town to attend a rally that was organized by a group called Palestine Youth Movement. Palestine Youth Movement is pro-Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to smear them here. They
Mm-hmm.
support and they celebrate Hamas. And after October 7th, before Israel even responded militarily, they like the day after, they announced and promoted a celebration of October 7th. They were celebrating the butchering of 1,200 people by Hamas. And I don't want to make any assumptions about people. So I asked Dave, like, you've been promoting this group that promotes Hamas and celebrates Hamas. You're going to go march with them. I don't know if you knew about this. And now that you know about it, are you still going to go march with them? And at
Mm-hmm.
first he was sort of in disbelief. He said, "Are you sure? Can you send me proof? How do you know that they celebrated it?"
Mm-hmm.
And I showed him the proof. They had posted this very publicly and proudly. And he took a full 9 days to think about what his answer was. And after 9 days, he sent me a lengthy response in which he sort of concocted a justification, in my view, of how it was still okay.
Okay. Yeah.
There was still a way. And I think at one point he even said, "The lives that I can save through my activism is worth whatever marginal harm this brings." I'm paraphrasing here, but he did say that he
Yeah.
feels that he is saving lives, and these, he feels that whatever's happening to Jews is sort of insignificant, and it's essentially the ends justifies the means.
Absolutely. And I think the in the next podcast, the same Zaman sort of uses the same argument. And I would also say that university students who may not have any particular, connection to Gaza or anything like that get swept up in that too, right? Because in a secular vacuum, many university students that don't actually have their own religion would probably be much more susceptible to the idea, I'm doing good, this is kind of giving me some meaning in life, and who doesn't want to save, innocent babies, which is how it's being framed, from being killed by Jews, right? If that's the rhetoric.
Yeah, and you've seen this yourself. I know that you have viewers outside of Canada as well. People should know this, and you've seen this yourself. We heard so much about the encampments at Columbia University and schools like that. It's nothing compared to what's been going on Canadian campuses.
Mm-hmm.
Windows smashed and protesters rushing into classes because they found out that the professor is Israeli, disrupting, like really menacing people, chanting "Go back to Europe," like just a horrible bigoted thing. They chanted it to an Iraqi Jew of all people on the campus of McGill. I know students and professors at McGill. It's not constrained as it was in Columbia. This is like very high, tight security Ivy League school where the encampment was kept in a certain area. These schools are frightening. They have been frightening places during the height of these demonstrations. They are not safe places for Jews.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what's going on there? Yeah, I definitely feel that there's a seduction. There's an exoticization of the transgressive nature of wearing some of these symbols, and this is fun. This is part of university culture for a long time, is to
Mm-hmm.
dabble in radical politics, and for a lot of people that's a phase
Yeah.
that they go through. But if you are at school and swept up into something like that at the wrong time with the wrong cause, you're marching with hate. You're really hurting people, and you're advocating for some vile ideologies, and it's getting normalized, and our universities are embarrassing themselves in their responses to this.
Yeah, and many people see these protesters, backing up what you're saying here, as, like this is just like another civil rights movement, or this is like an anti-Vietnam thing. But definitely, when you peel away the layers and the organization as well, it's quite clear that that's not happening. Now, your next guess, like if Meslin was enlightening, your next guess, I think, like pushed it further. So this fellow is somebody who started showing up at the corner, I guess, of Bathurst and Shepherd as a counter movement to protesters that were out there in Toronto, raising awareness for the hostages kidnapped by Hamas. Is that correct?
Yes, there emerged in a very Jewish part of Toronto a group of demonstrators who would get out there and wave the Israeli flag around, and I'm sure there was a variety of motivations. I saw mostly people saying "bring them home."
Mm-hmm.
I see in this people who are not going to disappear and are asserting that they're not going anywhere, that Toronto belongs and Canada belongs to Jews just as much as anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some people there who I think had more virulent anti-Palestinian messages as well. I don't want to sugarcoat it. All of those things were happening. And so that attracted this counter demonstration of anti-Zionist protesters on the other side of the street. They came back week after week for over 40 weeks. I was watching them as they went, and a bunch of people have been reporting on it and making videos of it, and their demonstrations have been rife with abject Jew hatred. Nazi salutes and Hamas glorification and terrible chants. I'm not saying that everybody there was a rampant anti-Jew bigot, but they were there and they were tolerated throughout. So I spoke to the spokesman for this group, and it was a really interesting conversation because Sky Moez Zaman, he said to me, as most of these organizers will say, I am not against Jews. I have nothing against Jews. And then we go through the things that are said at his protest, and I'll give him credit. He didn't pretend that they weren't being said, and he didn't pretend that they weren't anti-Semitic. We went through the usual, what is from the river to the sea mean? We have two different feelings about that. But when you get to go back to Europe, or from water to water, Palestine is Arab. Yeah. There's just like some stuff there that
Go
is
back to Europe, not a fan. He said not a fan.
Yeah.
That's not a really strong condemnation, right?
No, he was like, and it was interesting, but it was interesting there too, because a similar thing happened is with Meslin, where he was like, well, there's a bunch of 20-year-old, airheads who get a little bit too excited. And then I found out that the guy who's actually organizing it, Moez is the spokesman, but Navid Bahadwar is the actual organizer. The guy's like in his 50s or something. And he's like, why are you going to a Jewish neighborhood? Why aren't you going to the Israeli consulate? He said, because this is a Zionist infested area.
Yeah.
This is like Nazi era stuff.
Yeah.
And Moaz, he didn't know that Moaz had said that Navid had said that. And he said, you know what? When they go, we'll go. Like, you're right. He ultimately conceded. Yeah, I think I am. And I said, like, this is a neighborhood that's getting schools shot at. I'm not saying you're doing it, but other people are coming and shooting at schools and firebombing synagogues. And then you show up with your signs and your buddy's got a Sieg Heil. And you're making life really miserable for people, really terrifying. And he said, well, maybe that's true. I accept that to some extent. But I'll leave when they leave. I'll leave when the pro-Israel crowd leaves. Well, the pro-Israel crowd left after the hostages were released. And the pro-Palestine anti-Zionist movement demonstration keeps coming. I don't think Moaz goes anymore, but that demonstration keeps coming. And interestingly, now that they can't yell at the Jews across the street, they've started to march into the residential neighborhood and yell at Jews like right on their doorsteps.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So,
and this is the same area where they ripped, it's very close to where they were ripping mezuzahs out of like a senior citizen's apartment building the other weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you want to talk about the most vulnerable people in society. And the mezuzah itself is sort of like a symbol of kind of protection, right? Like in itself.
Yeah, that's the meaning of it. But, it's also just something that any practicing Jew puts on their door. And this is, it really is testing us as a society as to like what we're willing to tolerate here. Like making old, vulnerable people feel like your enemy, somebody who wants to kill you, was right there. They were right outside your door, and they are ripping down the symbol. Like, don't let people know you're Jewish, because these people are out there, and they'll come right up to your door. Some of these people are Holocaust survivors. Like, this is not acceptable.
No, it's not. And so another interesting thing he does, and you push him on it, when you bring up globalize the Intifada, he admits, first of all, that he believes in Hamas, and he believes in armed resistance, and he believes that this is what the globalize the Intifada means. But he says he's just not going to do it here himself, which could seem a lot of pretty coy to the residents of Shepherd and Bathurst, of that home, and all of these things together, the pursuing into the neighborhoods afterward and stuff like that. I mean, it brings up questions of how much good faith this person was having in his conversation with you. Again, basing it on the premise that he believes that Israel is purposely trying to extinguish the population of Gaza, that they're mass murdering babies. We know from the media, we know from a great Free Press investigation, which was really simply done, actually. They looked up the names of these kids that looked, kind of emaciated, and found out that they had prior health conditions, Then there was 12 instances, So that is a purposeful kind of misinformation campaign. We also, we know these things are happening. This doesn't take away from any deaths of any children or any families or anything like that. But it seems to me that the context of, dropping flyers, calling people, telling them to leave areas, a culture of, pay to slay, where you're going to pay people's families. It seems like liberal North America doesn't really understand what they're dealing with here. And there's also numbers to say, these numbers that are happening in the war are given to us by the Palestinian Authority, which is Hamas run, right? So, there's a lot of, people are dying, absolutely. Children are dying, families are dying. But genocide is a purposeful act. And to say that Israel is setting out to kill babies, which is the premise of these people being out there in the first place, don't you think that should be countered more often? With information or specialists talking about the campaign that's being conducted or things like that?
Well, look, there is an information war going on, and to the extent that I look at the media, I certainly have covered things like this front page photograph of the New York Times purporting to show a baby that was born healthy but was now on the brink of starvation. Later revealed that this child was born with very serious health conditions.
Hmm.
I wade into these things with some trepidation because,
Yeah.
as you say, there is no denying the human suffering in Gaza. I also, as a journalist, just think that we have to have, especially when horrible things happen, we have to have very, very good record keeping because there are people who will distort things for either purpose. I don't engage beyond a certain point with this ongoing debate of, should we call it a genocide or shouldn't we call it a genocide, or what's the proper terminology? I find that the discourse is not often in good faith. To even question the use of that word is often used as like that's proof that you are a genocide supporter, that you would dare to question that term.
Right.
And ultimately, I report from the perspective of a neighbor and civilian and like journalist covering Canada, and I don't want to accept any terms like, I don't know what the International Criminal Court is going to decide. I don't know if it's going to be a fair verdict or a politicized verdict, or even if everybody agrees that Israel has done the G word. Does that then mean that this is all okay here?
Yeah. No.
So,
No. That
you
that's
know,
that's that's a that's a good point. It doesn't. First of all,
so
that's an
either
excellent
you
point.
think that Jews should be blamed and scapegoated for what Israel does because what? Because we like have a religious connection to Israel, or because we have family in Israel, or because we have a ethnic, historic, ancestral, some would say indigenous connection to Israel, or just like out of practicality, we see how things are going here and we think that we're glad that Israel exists as a safety. Whatever reason people have, Jews have connected to Israel for a long time, way before Israel was established.
Hmm.
And to say to Jews that having that connection means that you are a fair target for whatever we want to do to you,
Yeah.
that is how this is all getting framed. And
Absolutely.
I feel like a pressing need to reject that right out the bat, because I think that what a lot of anti-Zionists want to do is they want to force you in a position of defending Israel, and they'll throw up in your face photographs of terrible things, and it's just a way of pinning them on you and forcing you into a position where you actually are accepting that you're somehow like this is your doing, and you're on the hook for it.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think it's to wade into it either side is a bit dangerous. I also think there's danger also into omission, especially knowing that their argument and the dehumanization rests on that. So I think that's something that has to be kind of like that we need to really think about and struggle with as journalists, because we're Canadians, we don't like war, but we have to realize that if they're going there out there on the streets and nobody is actually kind of bringing counter information, whatever's available, to the claim that you know Israelis, and then by extensions anybody that supports them who's Zionist, are supporting baby killing, murdering. That is the whole undergirding of the thing, right?
No, you're
So
absolutely right, and I think that right now journalism is getting as divided as everything else.
yeah.
If we agree as journalists across left, right, whatever, on
Hmm.
nothing else, I think we need to agree on the importance of facts,
Yes,
of verifiable
absolutely.
information. And we should be very suspicious of these campaigns in which, whether it's happening or not, the way that you verify that is that somebody else says that it's happening. Well, I've got 5 people that's not verification.
Absolutely.
You can point to 5 different bodies that say something. It doesn't make it any more true.
Right, and you need to be open to changing your thing, and you just need to not have a horse in the race, which is what you're trying to do. But we also have to realize that if we have a soldier, a Western soldier, and the situation is they're fighting the Nazis, and if these guys can put themselves in a position where it looks like they're that soldier fighting Nazis, then it's really we have to be careful about what we're kind of. I guess the left is actually a strong proponent of this, like what we're platforming, or what we're allowing to happen.
Yeah, look, this is Holocaust inversion. It's very
Yeah.
powerful. It's a very compelling idea to a lot of people. Oh, now the Jews are the Nazis,
Hmm.
and by their own logic of like anything you do to a Nazi is okay. Now they're fair game, and this is
Yeah.
that I will say is a
You feel it, right? You feel it.
Oh, well, it's very hurtful, of course, but I'm more.
I mean the temperature. I
Yes.
guess what I mean
Well,
is
it's terrifying and fascinating to see the way in which it's getting constructed.
right.
To see the way that things are getting flipped in such a way that, people didn't talk about the Holocaust for a long time. It took a long time for society to come to a consensus that something very evil had happened. And to see that the same language and mechanisms being weaponized against Jews, and I will agree, like I don't debate this or that in terms of what's going on day to day in the Middle East, but there is no corollary, there is no comparison, even as a human rights tragedy and crisis, which I think it is. It's not the Holocaust. It
Hmm.
bears very little resemblance to this, and that's okay. It's not about some supremacy thing
Yeah, of
that nothing
course.
can be as bad as the Holocaust. The Rwandan genocide is the Rwandan genocide. The
Hmm.
Holocaust is the Holocaust. These things need to be understood separately.
Absolutely.
And Holocaust inversion is a racist enterprise
Yeah.
and a factually bereft one.
And so I guess I'm getting to your last podcast today, which I
Sure.
did get a chance to skim through, which suggests that you've answered some of those questions. So today, in an X post about your latest episode, you begin assured that anti-Semitism is definitely happening here, and you have three theories. And you start to explore Canada's government, our police, and our immigration. And then you say that you have one conclusion. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that right now? And I guess I also want to ask you, why is education not in there?
Oh, that's not bad. Because like you make a podcast too long, nobody will listen to it. But
My other question was going to be, I'm going to like, how long is this going to go on? As long as it needs to? Um,
this season of the show is a 6-episode season, and
okay.
I would love to never make another one. It may be necessary to keep going. I don't know. Yeah, so I look at the three main theories that are out there. The ones that are kind of pre-existing, because a lot of people are trying to understand why it's been so bad in Canada. And so yes, there's a lot of talk that the government has failed to protect the Jewish population, has failed to protect values of anti-racism, and has even encouraged these things. We've heard
Hmm.
that made in recognizing the state of Palestine and cutting off arms to Israel.
Hmm.
We've heard that they're rewarding Hamas, they're encouraging the protests, and they're encouraging anti-Semitism. So I look
Hmm.
at that, and I look at in a more day-to-day level what's like. Okay, that's all well and good.
Yeah.
Whatever Trudeau said about being a post-national state and whatever recognition Carney did, but like, what about my mayor? What
Hmm.
about like my city council? Like, why is this
Hmm.
stuff allowed in my neighborhood
Hmm.
week after week after week? And that takes us to looking at the police. And I think we've all seen these videos that are pretty shocking of like people making overt death threats. And a cop is just standing there, just listening to this, doing nothing. And I thought we had anti-hate laws in Canada. I thought we protected vulnerable people in Canada. And the cops just stand there and do nothing.
Or
And
bring them
so,
donuts.
or bring them donuts, bring them coffee and donuts from Tim Hortons.
Right.
And you know, I talked to City Councilor James Pasternak. We look at the police record on this,
Hmm.
and I don't have grand conspiratorial
No.
ideas about the police hating Jews.
No.
What you do learn when you dig into this is that they have adopted this policy of de-escalation, and it kind of makes sense. You've got like these big rowdy kind of frightening demonstrations. At times people have smoke bombs and they're wearing like a lot of military imagery, and
Hmm.
they're banging on war drums, and they've got
Yeah.
posters of the Hezbollah rifle.
Hmm.
And into this situation walks one angry Jewish person who wants to yell at them. That's not going to go well. And so what do the cops do? They tell the Jew, go somewhere else.
Or the Jewish person is just there with a flag.
Or the Jewish, yeah.
It doesn't matter. Or the media. So I can tell you
Or not
that.
even with the flag, because we tell the story of
Yeah.
a rabbi in Montreal
Hmm.
who was told to leave as he was like he was just there, and a protest comes by. So he stands there and he starts filming it on his phone, and the
Hmm.
cop tells him to leave. He didn't even have an Israeli flag. He was wearing a kippah. So
Absolutely.
like,
Absolutely.
this is what people mean when they say systemic racism. That cop isn't like a Jew hater, but he's
Yeah.
found himself in a position where the presence of a Jew needs to be policed.
Right. And in Montreal, it's also the media. So I found out quickly after coming back to Montreal that, as somebody from National Post, just standing there with a camera, just trying to record a Montreal for Palestine protest, that I would soon be surrounded And I had to be pulled out of the situation. And the cops came over and talked to me, and they said, "You need to leave. If you don't, we'll arrest you for obstruction of justice." And I said, "I'm with National Post. I'm just recording it. I'm not saying anything. I'm not doing anything." And one police officer says to me, "Would you go into a field of lions?" And I said, "Well, it's your job to get rid of the lions."
Mm-hmm.
And then they pushed me back further
Mm-hmm.
in the crowd. I mean, I can understand the situation that they have, but how did it get this bad? The other thing I think that we can't discount is that these protests are paying a lot of overtime to police officers. So how does that disincentivize them arresting these individuals and trying to kind of wane them down? It really doesn't, does it?
I hadn't considered that. I'd love to know more about that. I think that might be in the picture as well. Look, when we look at something like the G20, where the cops were widely criticized for overreaction, the question was asked, like, what if you had just let this protest play out? And maybe a couple of windows would have gotten smashed, but probably nobody would have gotten hurt. And it was just the G20 and they would have gone home. And so I think that that's a reasonable argument when you look at how much violence and how many arrests where the charges were dropped and there was over policing. So the police take that lesson going forward and they look at this new protest movement through that lens. What they don't
Mm-hmm.
realize is this is very different.
Yes.
These guys are going to come back
Mm-hmm.
every single week, and
Yeah.
if they're allowed on the main intersection, they'll go into the residential neighborhood, and if they're allowed in the residential neighborhood, somebody's going to go into the apartment building. This is not just going to kind of play itself out and fizzle out over time. By their own description, this is a globalized movement, and every concession that they get from government or recognition of this or cutting off arms, they say this fuels us further because Zionism is still alive on the streets of Toronto and the streets of Montreal, and we need to weed it out of every nook and cranny until the Zionism is dead. People should be paying attention, and not just Jewish people. I don't think that this is just about what happens to Jewish people.
No, absolutely, it's not. And unlike, student protests in Montreal about tuition fees or anything like this, it is very different protest. And speaking to a terror specialist, they said, like a marching is a form of kind of, like taking up space and saying we're here now. And, there's a cultural kind of component to this as well that, as Canadians, we just don't understand. We just don't understand. And as Zaman pointed out, these are very well organized. I get told to go somewhere and I go there, right? And I don't know if you've seen my interview with Lara Burns, who is an ex-special agent for the FBI, who actually prosecuted terrorists for financing in the Holy Land versus U.S. Case. She discusses this at length. There was a 1993 meeting in Philadelphia in response to Arafat saying he was going to share the land. They gathered quickly. It was wiretapped. There's a searchable document, and they talk about having these organized plans, for schools, for media, and and for religious institutions. So the question, I guess, is then like, why? Going back to government, which I know we kind of focused a lot on police because you feel that's a very heavy component. Why has our government not been paying attention to this, knowing that since 1993 this was a plan? Why is CSIS not paying attention to this? There are charities walking around gathering money. We don't know where it's going. What
Mm-hmm.
is going? What is happening?
I look forward to reading that piece. I'm not familiar with it. I definitely have heard a lot about the funding networks, and I know a lot about Qatari funding of universities' Middle Eastern Studies departments. I'm very cautious because uh, I I'm wary of some theories that I have heard that these movements are being kind of directly funded out of the Middle East. From what I've seen, I know that there's like some evidence of people getting kind of these little scholarships or stipends for protesting, which I think is concerning. But I feel like to the extent that some of this gives the idea that this is sort of an astroturfed or artificial or funded movement, I don't think that's the case, which is not to say we shouldn't look at the roots of it or the networks or who's behind some of this organizing. I think we have to accept on their own terms that the people who are taking to the streets for this movement believe what they are saying, and they are They are highly motivated, and some of
Mm-hmm.
them don't quite know what they've got themselves into, and others have an agenda. And I don't buy the notion that they're being kind of puppeteered necessarily by others. When they tell
Oh,
me,
it's not a notion that people are. I believe that people on the street believe what they're saying,
yeah,
and these groups are all very different. The Palestine Youth is different from Montreal for Palestine. Is different from the students at the university, and the reasons for doing it are all different.
Terry,
Um,
it's all worth inquiry because
yeah.
it really is like a complex, and the extent of it is big and growing, and it's got to do with more than Israel because it's becoming a catch-all cause for every other cause. And you know what I mean? So I think that there is something brewing here that is like, it doesn't serve it to say like, okay, actually we're going to figure out what's really happening because it's all one, or it's not all one centrally organized
Oh yeah,
system.
I know that this isn't a conspiracy theory, and it sounds like a conspiracy theory. The meeting happened. It's a documented meeting, and what I'm talking about is not about the funding because they got caught in the way they were getting funding
Oh,
before.
I see.
Now they use charitable organizations. It
No,
was
I'm not
literally a
criticizing.
plan. It
Having
was
not read
literally
your piece,
Yeah, it was
I have
literally
no
a plan
criticism.
of members of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas to decide what they were going to do in North America.
Yeah.
And this isn't all Muslims or anything like that, but yeah, you definitely it's not like a conspiracy theory for sure. So
No, I
the
hear
other
you. And actually, we look into in the final episode, which is coming out next week.
Mhm,
Where does anti-Zionism come from? I think
mhm.
there's a sense
Yeah.
that this is like the construction of the Arab world,
Yeah.
and there's some really interesting revelations. I talked to a scholar who's traced it back, and I encourage people to listen to the show to hear that too. So
Great.
understanding
I'm
this every way we can is imperative.
Yeah, I'm going to wrap this up for us. I want to thank you, Jesse, and for joining us, and our readers for joining us for this important discussion. So, your podcast, how can people contribute to fund it if you want to keep it going? How can they do that?
Well, I've partnered with Canadaland has partnered with the Canadian Jewish News, so we're in a position where we can actually offer tax receipts to people who want to help make this show. So really the best way is email me. I'm at jesse@canadaland.com, JESSE at canadaland.com, and I'll walk you through that process. And you'll be funding not just the making of this podcast, but
Hmm.
getting people to listen to it. We're going to take it to campuses. We're going to take it to universities and colleges across Canada where people need to hear this, where people are unsafe, and really try to make an inclusive space for just like a different kind of conversation about how we got to stop hurting each other and making life miserable for each other. So that's what you're funding if you fund this project.
Thank you for joining us again today, Jesse, and thanks to our viewers for watching.
Terry, thank you so much for the conversation and for your interest in this and for your own work as well on the subject.